Yeah, I think probably the biggest difference is just the knowledge that we have of our current team, the makeup of our current team, what truly our needs are, what truly where we maybe have a surplus. There's just a lot more clarity when you're in the position we were a year ago pertaining to our roster, which I think is the most important piece of having knowledge of to have a successful offseason. Was we had watched a lot of guys on tape, but we hadn't spent a lot of time with a lot of guys. We didn't know everybody's drive, everybody's makeup, and everybody's true ability when you see them day in and day out. So I think we're coming into this segment of the offseason with a lot more clarity of what the Raiders need to do in the offseason, where our strengths are and where our weaknesses are. We know a lot more about our players in general. And then I think that the second part of that is we just spent a whole fall working together, really the last year working together. I'm talking about the scouting staff in our system, with our verbiage, talking our language, understanding specifically what we're looking for with this new coaching staff and this system. And so we have a lot more clarity in that regard too, of like just talking the same language, what the value of the players and whether it be free agency, the draft. We're not talking two different languages this year, we're talking the same language. I felt at the end of the day, we ended up being pretty prepared last year. Now it was a little bit more crammed, but I think I felt prepared when we got to the draft process. I think, will we be more prepared? Will we be more in sync? Will we have more clarity this year? I think so, just from spending the amount of spending time and again, working a full calendar year in the system that we currently operate in. You have to remember last year, we had a lot of scouts that were either already with the Raiders or came from another organization. And so there's a whole period of time there last year that was just, yes, they were out there evaluating prospects, but they were also trying to figure out learning our grading scale, learning how to talk the language that we speak, learning the type of, just to pick one position, the specific type of linebacker that we're looking for. So while it was productive when we were prepared, there was a dual thing that was going on. It was evaluating, but also learning on what I'm supposed to be evaluating. And so it's going to be a little bit tighter. Everything's going to be a little bit tighter, a little bit more detailed, a little bit more continuity because, of spending that time together. Yeah, it's a much bigger process than I probably even understood. Because there's again, just like when you're in the classroom, there's different learning styles. People learn a different way. People retain a different way. And so you can't just expect that, hey, I said this thing one time that everybody gets it and everyone's off and running with it. It's just, that's not how it works. And so there's still an element of teaching that we're still doing, which I think is just a natural part of the process of continued growth and continued involvement, and they're curious. And I think that's a really good trait to have for a set of employees. They're curious about what they don't know. They're curious about learning more. They're curious about ironing out the kinks of things that maybe they're confused on. And I think having that kind of growth mindset with the scouts that we have on staff is going to be a really important part of us continuing to evolve and grow as a scouting department. Quarterback position, I've mentioned it before, I think it's the hardest position to play in all of professional sports. And there's and part of the reason it is a hard position is because all the responsibility that a quarterback has to shoulder. And a lot of that responsibility has to be processed, analyzed, and a decision has to be made within about, sometimes 2 to 2.5 seconds, sometimes less, sometimes a little bit more. And so the quarterback position, I think more than any other position on the field, there's a very large neck up component to being successful at that position. And so I think that there's more, we won't even have enough time in this setting to get all the information that we need to get. There'll be a multi-step process that we'll have to go throughout the spring and the pre-draft process to learn about all the individual characteristics of these quarterbacks that are here. And so it's just different because the amount of responsibility and the amount of neck up intangibles that you have to have for that position make it different. Reality is we have one quarterback, currently under contract, and the way that you acquire quarterbacks in this league is through free agency, trade, in the draft. And so, there's all those, you have to explore all those different options. It's the responsible thing to do. And so, we started that free agency process back in October, and part of that process is eliminating, you just mentioned it, there's a large number, 20 plus players from the free agency standpoint. So part of that process is going in through and eliminating some of the guys that don't fit. Whatever that reason may be, and then you combine that with what's available in the draft, and then you have to have an understanding of how those two things play off each other. You have to understand the supply and demand of those two positions, and again, then you're calculating where you're at in the draft. So there's a ton of variables that just go into acquiring a player at that specific position, and you really have to keep all options on the table when you're in a position like we are, where you're rebuilding the room. You want to move up in the draft, you have the, it's been proven over the history of the draft, like you can move up from 7 and get into a range where there's maybe a player there that you want to get. Obviously, there's a cost associated with that. You have the flexibility to move back, but you're also not moving back necessarily so far that you're taking yourself out of a high quality player. And then you can sit at 7, and there's going to be some players, when I look at our draft board right now, and I look at, call it, maybe who we see right now as the top 10 players. I'm excited about who we can get at 7 too, just standing pat. And so we're gonna have an opportunity to improve the team, one way or another. And to your point, sitting where we're at, it's not ideal because it means that you didn't win enough football games in our situation, but it does have some flexibility to really, make a decision what you wanna do in a couple different ways to improve the team.